So I wanted to talk to you guys about some really interesting pandemic news that I came across. We've been talking about lockdowns and restrictions that governments have put in place and whether the costs and benefits are really worth it. And I've started to question this a lot. I mean, you have states like Texas and Florida doing well with essentially zero restrictions at this point, while some states like Michigan that are still partially locked down, they're turning into a COVID disaster zone. So I've always wondered, right, do the costs outweigh the benefits of these draconian measures? But an economist in Canada actually just published a comprehensive study trying to quantify and answer this. So he looked at life years preserved in terms of people's time and how they value their life compared to living under lockdown versus non-lockdown. He found that in terms of life preserved, it was at most 1.7 million life years in Canada. But in terms of life years lost from these draconian measures, it was 6.3 million. That's not even close, the costs outweighing the benefits there. It's an enormous gap. So this economist actually concluded that it is possible lockdowns will go down as one of the greatest peacetime policy failures in Canada's history. Do you guys think something similar is probably true here in the US?
No, and I think that because the people who write the history and the people who tell the story of the history, that being the media, are never going to admit such a thing. It will be a fringe, YouTube-y opinion to say things like it was the greatest peacetime failure in our history. It'll never get written anywhere else.
Right, I mean, I feel like a conspiracy theorist just for saying, hey, we don't need to arrest people for attending church. We don't need to arrest people for not wearing a mask. But the media is making me feel like I'm some type of right-wing extremist for not trusting everything that Fauci says about the issues.
Yeah, but I do think, though, there's some mainstream recognition of the enormous cost these lockdowns have had. Look at the case for reopening schools, how across the political spectrum that started to get so much support because people have seen the huge academic losses from COVID lockdowns, the huge unemployment that's caused by these lockdowns, the spike in mental health issues, depression and anxiety, the drug overdoses.
The same people who have pointed to the mental health issues that kids have been having have also been pointing to schools existing and opening at all would also be like a racial justice issue because the schools are not great to begin with. And I can't pin down what that big meta narrative is. I don't feel like the powers that be are ever going to admit that this was a disaster. But I mean, I think this is correct. I completely accept this premise. But I want to ask you, how on earth do you sort of quantify years lost in a abstract way? Because we understand deaths, that's literal loss of life. But it seems like this study is quantifying enjoyment of living as something that is lost. And I don't know if you can actually put that up to a casket.
So the difference, I agree, it's an inexact science. It's a pretty rough estimate. But what he did was they polled people and they found that most people, if you presented them with the option, would take 10 months of normal life over 12 months of lockdown life.
Well, who would take the 12 months of lockdown life?
Who says very yes small percentage of people. Majority of people would prefer 10 free months of life. So if you're forcing people to spend a year locked down, the value of that loss to people, they're estimating as a kind of a conservative base estimate, is 2 months life lost. So multiplying that across the population gives you a rough sense, before you even factor in the overdoses, the academic losses, the unemployment, of the millions of life years lost just from this. And obviously, I think quantifying something like this is at best a very rough science. So if it was close, I'd be like, can we really believe that? But it's such a huge gap.
Yeah.
6.3 million versus 1.7 million that I buy it. And I think it stands to reason that that is true.
I mean, have you seen the articles that have kind of trickled out on different websites about how 2020 and 2021 was the best of days for the nation's introverts? Which is really sick to say that all right, so the way that the country has been for the past year has been really great for the introverted worrywarts of the nation who don't want to go out anyways. And it just makes me think that the people in that study who would actually say they would prefer 12 months of living in lockdown, they are your double maskers. They are the people who go running outside with masks on anyways when there's nobody reasonable who thinks that you have to be doing that for your health.
That point comes from such a place of privilege. It's the people that make a comfy salary. You know, they didn't lose their job over the lockdowns. They get to sit at home, order DoorDash. They get to sit at home, order Uber Eats and Domino's and go on their Zoom meetings and all that kind of stuff. When the rest of us feel very depressed by it, and the rest of us lost money because of the lockdowns. The rest of us may have lost our jobs because of the lockdowns. And I'm speaking as someone who's actually very introverted, which may surprise people because I'm very like loud online, but in real life, I'm like socially awkward. But I hated the lockdown. I hated it. I hate waking up every day and logging on to my online Zoom class where I have no social interaction. I hate that my wrestling season was canceled. It really sucks. So I feel like it's, again, such a place of privilege to say that this benefited the nation's introverts. This was fine. We got a year of relaxation, ordering takeout.
It's the same people that say, well, the upside is we reduced carbon emissions. It's like,
this is not what we're worrying about.
But it takes the perspective, and unfortunately, this is the perspective of the people, myself included, who are journalists. Most journalism jobs transfer well to remote, stay-at-home work. Income's uninterrupted, so it's then easy for the journalistic class and the media class to hammer the lockdown horn because they're not really the ones suffering from this.
Did you see Tucker Carlson sort of go off the rails the other night about masking? Like, I understand where the frustration comes from Tucker Carlson about like just like, oh, these people who are like wearing double masks and they're putting masks on their children at the park outside. And I go like, yeah, I mean, I get that. That is a little bit worry-wartish. I mean, I was at the dog park the other day and this lady like had double mask on and she also like didn't want to let her dog into the park at all because she's like, I don't do dog parks, they're just too dangerous. I'm like, come on, you can't live that. Yeah, it's like you can connect the dots between those two things, like somebody who doesn't like ever want to let their dog into a dog park with someone who would double mask. Except Tucker Carlson has like let his frustration go to the realm of being incredibly unconservative and unlibertarian about the masking thing. Like, he wants to have people call the cops on people masking their children outside. We're not through this pandemic thing yet. Like, I understand why people might do that.
I mean, I think there's not really, from what I understand, even Fauci recently admitted this, much science behind outdoor masking. You need minutes of close contact really indoors with someone to get COVID.
They're changing the guidance today.
They are.
Yeah.
But ultimately, even if people want to do silly restrictions that don't make sense, also, here's the thing that was crazy to me about what Tucker said. It's required under law in many places that people do force their kids to wear masks outdoors. They're obeying the law, even if maybe they don't want to do that. There's these mandates across the country in many parts still. So he's saying call the cops on parents for doing what they're legally required to do. We should not be calling the cops on people. That's actually illegal to call the cops frivolously when you know it's not a crime. So I thought that monologue was straight up unhinged.
I wonder if it'd be footing the legal bills for people who call the cops and then get in trouble for frivolously sticking them on randos.
And I don't know, Olivia, I feel like we just need to stop calling the cops on people all the time.
It's so frivolous. This is such a crazy issue. And the thing about the masks is, I feel like you should have the right to not wear one, but you should have the right to protect yourself as you see fit, especially if you're immunocompromised or you just feel some type of way about masks, you're a germaphobe, whatever, that's your right.
Leave people alone. Like, that's the thing that I've wanted this entire year is, first of all, I've never had anybody scoff at me for not wearing a mask when I'm walking through Washington, D.C.
Oh, I have. I think that's valid.
I think I'm supposed to. No one's ever done it to me. But that's not a thing that I have encountered. It is absolutely not what we should be doing to fight back against mass culture, to go after people on the street and get in people's faces over choosing to live a different way. We want people to have space and to be themselves. Like, this is just kind of like where Tucker Carlson is just trying to destroy every libertarian fiber that America has left.
And also I just think it's counterproductive because I oppose things like forcing kids to wear masks outdoors. I think that's silly and not a good idea.
I tell my kid to take it off.
Right. But when we get lumped in with crazy people who are saying call the cops on people who wear masks, that discredits our argument, and it really makes it seem like the super hawkish narrative is the only valid and serious one. So I think what he did was just really dumb.
I have actually kind of like a my body, my choice theory when it comes to masks. I don't choose to wear one, and I really never believed in the science. I know now they're changing the science on it to say it's not effective, it's not needed outdoors. But I remember I was contributing for the Daily Caller, and I wrote the article when Fauci first said that we don't need to wear masks, that we need to save the N95s for nurses and for EMTs and for people who are taking care of COVID patients, and that it would actually be counterproductive if you're not actively taking care of a COVID patient. And they switched the narrative, and now they're switching the narrative back. I don't trust it.
And so I have some patience for this because, I mean, the science has changed. We've never encountered the coronavirus before. This is an entirely new thing. So I think it's acceptable for like the guidance to change over time, but not to make people like gaslight those who call you out on like, you are pretending you know things that you don't. Well, this like worship of Fauci can be separated from, okay, they've changed the guidance because we figured this out.
But that's what bothers me about Fauci, is he actually knew, or at least had a hunch, that the masks would help. But he said not to wear masks because he thought he knew better than everyone else that we really should be preserving them. So changing ideas and learning as you go makes more sense to me. But I feel that the public health bureaucracy has been deceitful at times because they think they know better than silly little Americans what to do. And so they tell you the information they think you need to know, not necessarily just being fully transparent. Here's what we know, decide for yourself, which is always what I favor.
Is that report on Canada at fee.org?
Yeah, absolutely. Fee.org/stories. People can go check it out.
Fee.org. You heard it here first. Go check it out, folks.